everyone. It's great to be here with you again. Very exciting today. We have a wonderful guest, Dr. Jacko. Joe, welcome to the show.
Appreciate the opportunity.
I know we are going to learn a lot of things from you, and I'm very excited for that. I'm always a learning hog. But just to give us the background, probably a great way to get started is if you tell us the route that brought you, to where you are now.
Okay. Well, growing up, I was very much an athlete, and I unfortunately got hurt a lot, spent a lot of time in emergency rooms. So that created my interest in medicine. And then during medical training, medical school and residency training, all the things we were learning, I was looking at it from the eye of an athlete. And when we treat athletes, the goal is optimal function. And so I did sports medicine for quite a bit. Then from 2012 to 2022, I was doing more sick care medicine. And I was really frustrated because the goal is not getting people to optimal function. We're just kind of putting a Band-Aid and, in my opinion, an over-reliance on medications. So I was getting a little frustrated with the way medicine is practiced, with too much emphasis on medications. We tend to overlook the foundations of medicine. And then there's some other things that led me to write the book that I think I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about. But that's my journey in a nutshell. I'm hoping that through the book, I was hoping to convey to the readers that they're not getting all the information they need to make the best healthcare decisions. Many times, medical science is not as pure as mathematics and physics, and sometimes the science can be a little bit tainted. And here in the U.S., the medical education and training is largely funded indirectly by the pharmaceutical companies, and that influences the overall practice of medicine.
So, correct me if I have the wrong impression, but from so many of the doctors that we interviewed on the show and so many of the MDs that are my friends, my impression of medical school is it's a big Excel spreadsheet. The condition, the medicine. The condition, the drug. It's an Excel spreadsheet, basically. And is there something to that?
Well, there may be something to it today. That didn't exist when I trained. That was medical school was 82 to 86. And that was before all this technology. But it's becoming very cookbook medicine. We have developed this mindset that every medical condition has a molecular cause, and therefore there's a molecular or a chemical solution to it.
So, it sounds very heartening to hear that having been an athlete, you became a doctor who dealt with, athletic injuries. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, what about the poor couch potato? There should be a specialist for, I'm a couch potato specialist. But then I realized that's most people,
Right. Yeah, I thought there should be a beach medicine fellowship.
Right.
But my opinion is, to me, the model that we should practice medicine through is looking at the athlete. And I try to treat all my patients as athletes, whether they're a 93-year-old female or 15-year-old high school athlete. And we can always try to achieve optimal function. Mainly that's going to be through exercise and nutrition and lifestyle. And the way the system is set up, there's just very little time during an office visit to cover those important aspects of health.
Well, I agree that everybody is an athlete. Whether you are in the Olympics and you're trying to break the world record, or you're trying to break your own record from when you were 92, mm-hmm. You're an athlete. You're an athlete relative to yourself.
Right. Everybody should strive to be the best person they can be. And some of my older patients, as they get older, I try to get them to think into the future. Like, you're 60 now. What do you want to be doing when you're 80 or 85? And many times they'll say things that they're not even doing now. So I'm not sure how you're going to walk 3 miles up a mountain when you're 85, when you're not even doing that at age 60. So I try to get them to think ahead.
There was a book that I once read. It wasn't written by an MD. It was written by a person who at age 46 found himself very overweight, in very bad shape, and he got jolted into spending a year becoming better, and he wrote a book about it.
Okay.
And the transformation, of course, is quite striking. And then there's another book. It just kind of came to me. The title of the book, this is a real book. At 70, I was a dud. At 80, I'm a stud.
Oh,
I mean, that's an actual book.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to see those types of transformations. And going back to the first example you gave, unfortunately for many of us, we have to hit kind of rock bottom before we will make the necessary changes.
So you obviously wrote a book, and we are going to go into what made you, but let's go into the reasoning. Obviously, to write a book of that nature, something must have not just driven you to it in one go. It must have been a process.
It was certainly a process that probably evolved over about 15 years. And in the book, I talk about 3 situations or 3 circumstances that made me question what we were being taught in medical school. So one had to deal with athletes and anabolic steroids. There was a movement to try to convince athletes not to use them. And they did studies that made anabolic steroids look like they did not work, but they were not using the same doses that athletes do. And everybody knew they worked, but the medical profession, particularly the sports medicine community, lost a lot of trust among athletes from doing that. And they tried to scare athletes from not using them. A second scenario came when I got back into the sick care medicine. There's a lot of new drugs on the market that I didn't know anything about, or very little, and I had to learn them. And I ended up meeting with pharmaceutical reps over lunch. They would bring me lunch and my staff lunch, and I kind of caught on to how they market their drugs. They really share only part of the data, and that's the data they want you to know so that you will prescribe medications. And then the third situation was COVID. I just thought there was a lot of dishonesty and some unethical behavior within the medical profession, and there is misinformation both outside medicine, but some of the misinformation, in my opinion, comes from within the walls of the medical profession, and that really was kind of the last straw for me.
So even those of us that are not specialists can see. I mean, obviously, I don't watch the commercials on television, but sometimes you get to see them. You're busy with something else and they run, and you see a commercial for a drug, and the screen is filled with beautiful people running and enjoying life in the field and doing beautiful, amazing thing. And then there's a list and a voice narrating the litany of side effects and horrors that can come. And sometimes the commercial is actually for the side effects. If you have side effects, you're going to be enjoying life again using our miracle drug. So, even as a regular person, you get a sense of what you said, that when the salespeople came to you, they focused on what works and kind of went very quickly about what is the negative, right?
Correct. That's part of it. But the way they make the drug look like it works better than it actually does. And it's through sleight of hand and statistical manipulation, if you will. So first of all, those commercials, the TV networks get about 10% of their revenue from the pharmaceutical ads. And if you watched the Olympics this past summer, probably every other ad was a pharmaceutical advertisement or commercial. But the things they don't tell, and they go through all those side effects, which in my opinion, most people can look up. In my opinion, they should add a few more additional information. Like they talk about what the relative risk is. If you take this drug, your risk of heart disease or heart attack will go down 30%. What they don't tell you, though, is that 100 people have to take the medication for 5 years to prevent that one heart attack. And if patients knew that, and that's part of what I was referring to when I said patients aren't getting all the information they need.
So the difference between relative, and absolute, I believe, has been also on the surface there during COVID, right? As to the effectiveness of the new vaccines. I mean, there was given a number that was relative, and then some people say, yeah, but the absolute is very different. And the absolute apparently is what counts. Can you talk about that?
Correct. So if going to the vaccines, they reported a 95% efficacy rate. But it took 22,000 patients to be vaccinated to prevent one COVID death. And that part was kept away from the public. Now, during the emergency use authorization, those numbers were not yet known. But the way they got to 95% is in the control group of people who did not get vaccinated, 0.88% COVID during the study period. So less than 1%. So it makes you wonder, was it really spreading that rampant as we were led to believe? In the group that got the vaccine, it was 0.4%. So that difference between 0.88 and 0.04 is 0.84, and then you divide that by the 0.88, and you get a 95% efficacy rate. But still, even in the people who did not get the vaccine, there was a less than a 1% chance of getting COVID.
Yeah, that is a little bit worrisome because never mind even the details of a particular drug or vaccine, we know that they are all likely to carry side effects.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no treatments without some potential downside. So we practice medicine. We're supposed to practice personalized medicine, but we really practice population health medicine. In other words, we'll put 100 people on a blood pressure, knowing only one's going to benefit from it. And the thinking is, well, these 99 don't benefit. At least we're not hurting them. But that's, we can't really say that with any certainty. Whenever you take a drug and you're taking it long term, we're changing their physiology in ways we don't fully understand.
Right, exactly. I think those are very key words, what you just said. Right. Because when you study the drug for blood pressure, let's say, you can study a certain pathway, but there's no way you can study all the pathways in all of the processes of the body.
Right. You don't know how it's affecting other organ systems.
Yeah.
And along those lines is, like I said, we don't know how it is affecting people, but many times what drives their use is from an insurance carrier. It's cheaper many times to pay for that drug in 99 patients that's not going to benefit. As long as that one heart attack or one stroke they save, it saves them money. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but also I see a little trap in the very words you just said. Because if somebody wanted to justify this practice, I mean, when you listen to what you just say, you kind of naturally recoil a little bit. What? You're giving a certain drug for blood pressure, let's say, to 99 people without any reason, with who knows what side effects, but the words you used could be a great retort for them to say, if we can prevent one death, isn't it worth it? That sounds so, angelic, right? So beautiful. Doesn't it?
Works on a lot of people. They're giving that blood pressure, say, to 99 patients who have high blood pressure. And that's where we kind of confuse patients. You think you're taking a medicine to lower your blood pressure or to lower your blood sugar or your cholesterol. That's not the real reason you're taking it. You really are taking that medication to prevent the complications of those conditions, mainly heart attack and strokes. So we can show everybody that, yeah, your blood pressure is coming down, your cholesterol is coming down, but that doesn't mean we're actually preventing a heart attack or a stroke in you.
So on this show, we obviously interview a lot of people who talk about life practices that lead very hopefully to better results in every domain. Mm-hmm. We have had a lot of people here talk about being out in the natural light, the sunlight, with so much science about the frequencies that the sun gives off and how our bodies had, adapted to that over hundreds of millions of years. And what all the wavelengths from the very shortest one at UVB to the longest one at infrared are doing to us and our mitochondria, and being out in the sun. And being out in the light, not necessarily in the sun. Some of us can get burned in the sun, but being in the light, which nowadays we are not. We spend time, indoors. And then what happens at night? Where it used to be night fell, there was maybe a little fire, and then people just went to bed. There wasn't a television, there wasn't a phone. But now we get a blue light driven, and it so happens that the blue light is the signal for, alertness. Hey, it's the middle of the day. Well, that can have a very bad effect on sleep. All of those, this is only with light, never mind food, never mind exercise. So all of these things sometimes don't maybe get the stage that they merit because it's so seductive to take a pill and then you don't have to do anything else.
Correct. Unfortunately, we developed a society that wants the quick fix. But, going back to your comments about the sun, I read an article not too long ago where just the sun penetrating their eyes, it has actually universal benefits on your overall health. And for people who don't like the sun, if they just kind of gradually increase or titrate their sun exposure, they'll start feeling better.
Well, somebody said that I interviewed here, she said something brilliant. Said, let's say you're very light-skinned and you're prone to getting burned. Use nature's sunscreen. That's called shade.
Well, I think Cleopatra used olive oil.
She might have had an olive skin, but we never know. By the way, you said before that maybe half of all commercials on TV are for drugs. And the impression that you get, very, very superficially, is that the other half are for fast food. So it's a perfect complement.
Right.
There's an ad for fast food followed by an ad for a drug. Fast food, drug, fast food, drug. And now your path has been charted. All you need to do is just get the fast food and there's going to be a drug for, whatever it causes.
Well, the marketers are very clever. They know what they're doing. And they know how to get us, regardless of the product, they know how to get us to use their product.
And I noticed also that the emphasis, and I think the emphasis on the society, especially in the United States, is always financial. In other words, you can rarely go wrong looking for the money. So, even when you see junk food or fast food commercials, many of them don't go so much they go into the price. You get 5 for $4.99. And now we have a special, you get it with large fries only for $3.99 with a giant soda. And so it's price-based. And then from the other end, when we talked before about giving a drug to 99 people that it's not going to have any effect on, well, it's going to have an effect on the bottom line of somebody.
One of the problems with medicine, you have so many different corporate interests, and none of the interests are necessarily aligned. And the CEOs, their responsibility is to their shareholder, not necessarily to me or you, the consumer or the patient. And I think, viewers and listeners need to understand that. There definitely is a motive to generate profit, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But it has to be done within an ethical framework. And what I've been seeing in the last 35 years of practicing is as the medicines become corporatized, a lot of these ethical boundaries or barriers are being broken, and it's almost become purely profit-driven these days.
Well, at least there's something, honest and upfront about it. Nobody in a corporation, be it a medical, be it, a pharmaceutical or anything, nobody is making any bones about it. They are beholden to their shareholders, and they want to maximize profit. At least that is very upfront, and it's not hidden.
Correct. And they probably could be a little bit more transparent in the way they present their studies. So to go over the absolute risk reduction, for instance. And that way a patient has a little bit more information to make the best decision for them. One of the points I make out in the book is each of us, we have to understand our own risk tolerance. Many people have a low risk tolerance. So if there's like a 1 in a million chance a drug might work, yeah, they want it. But some people, they want really convincing, strong evidence that's going to work for them. They have a high risk tolerance. They don't mind rolling the dice, if you will. The other problem is we as physicians, we have to understand our own risk tolerance because we tend to project it onto the patient. And we're frequently practicing defensive medicine. And you don't want to have a heart attack. I don't want to have it. I want you to have it. So I'm going to prescribe this, even though, a small chance it may work. So we each have to understand our risk tolerances.
What about the CYA factor?
Yeah, that's a big factor. It's a big factor.
I actually think I experienced it today.
Oh, did you?
Last week, I was in the kitchen and had a mishap with a very sharp knife and cut right straight and deep into the middle of my index finger. Now it's almost healed. Seems to be okay, except a few days later over here, not at the site of injury, it started feeling painful to the touch and a little inflamed. Went to the doctor. He said, well, you probably have an inflammation of the tendon sheath.
Mm-hmm.
So he gave me antibiotics, nothing that I really am very thrilled about, but, sometimes you do it. But I'm still on the course. And a couple of days ago, I had a question, and maybe I shouldn't have even asked it. I felt a slight tenderness here. I wasn't even sure, but I called my physician and said, could it be related? And he said, oh my God, it could mean that the infection has migrated and the hand is so complex. And so he referred me to a hand specialist, which I'm going to see tomorrow, actually.
Okay.
And said she will suss out what's going on. By the way, since then, there's nothing. Everything seems to be fine. But I got an urgent call from them this morning based on what he had written, based on my voice on the phone saying I may feel a little tenderness here. And he used the term. And when the specialist saw the term, she said, no, you can't wait until tomorrow. You must go to the ER right now because you could need surgical intervention and it's absolutely urgent. And I had to actually talk to the surgeon on the phone and say, listen, I just asked the question.
Right.
And this is clearly a cover your ass. I mean, she cares about me, obviously, but it's covering the bases. It's not really taking any chance. But the way she spoke was so scary to a patient. Surgery? I mean, I cut my finger in the kitchen. Surgery? I mean, that's a cover your ass. How much is that factoring into the way doctors are?
I mean, it's hard to put a percent on that, but we probably all encounter it every day. And to some degree, we're all probably doing that with our patients. You want to do the right thing, obviously, and unfortunately, there's just little room. If you're wrong, you're wrong. And, if a patient has a bad outcome, they have a bad outcome. So you want to avoid that. But in your particular case, I would have been more concerned if it was on this side rather than this side. But I go through that in the book. We're very good at creating fear and making everything sound like it's urgent. For instance, heart disease is the number one killer. Well, that sounds dire, but you have to understand that you need to know about 500 people to know one person who died of a heart problem this past 12 months. And, ironically, most people don't even know 500 people. So, because I see this a lot with patients, their doctor tells them, you need to be on statin drug right now. And usually there's time to work on the diet and exercise before you go to that step. We're very good at scaring people and making things sound like they need immediate attention.
By the way, sorry, this is not, but I'm curious. I go back a step. Why would you be more concerned if it was on this side?
Well, because your cut's on this side, your palmar or volar side, so that it would track if it's following the tendon sheath, it's going to go down this way.
My GP just said the hand is so complex and the sheaths are so complex. I don't even know, but he must have used the term that triggered her.
Right.
And she got a little panicky. Now, I am fascinated by you saying that 500 people, you need to know 500 people statistically to know somebody who died of a heart attack or heart disease.
In the last 12 months.
In the last 12 months.
Right.
That sounds so different than the message that you said one sentence prior. Heart, disease is the number one killer.
Right. So whenever you hear a statistic like that, you have to ask, well, how common really is it? Yes, the number one killer, but how common is it? So we have about 345 million people in the country. About 1% die every year. Heart disease is around 700,000 of those 1% deaths. So when you calculate it, it comes to about 500 people. So if you looked at the numbers in that sense, you would realize, okay, maybe I don't need to take this medicine yet. Maybe I have time to work on my lifestyle. I'm motivated to do that. But you can't do that if you don't know that information.
That is very fascinating. Just this one bit is already, I mean, if people take just this from this podcast, I'll be happy, because it's really changing the way you think about it. It changes the mindset. It changes the paradigm from saying it's the number one killer. And I agree, that's a statement made out of thin air. You don't really know what the basis for it is. And then you say 500 people to find somebody who died of heart disease in the last year. That's a completely different reality, which seems to be reality. It seems to be real. I mean, that's a very, very different way to think about it. And, well, would it be true that some people feel, maybe some doctors feel, scaring the public is not so bad? Because if you tell the public, look, heart disease is the number one killer, maybe more people will eat less junk. Maybe more people will eat better, will walk, will do. So, maybe scaring the public is not viewed as such a bad thing.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think physicians are trying to motivate patients to get them to change their ways. And a little scare factor is sometimes beneficial. But I think it has to be done I would say it has to be done in the context of all the other information that we discussed. So I read somewhere that we make about 35,000 decisions a day. And it's hard to believe that we make that many, but almost all of those we're weighing risk and reward. And our brains are doing it intuitively. And almost everything we do is you have to understand the risk and odds. Everything is a little bit of a gamble. Nothing works all the time. You have to know what the odds are of getting a disease. You have to know the odds if you leave it alone, what's going to happen. You have to know the odds if I take a medication or I had this surgical procedure, what are my odds of getting better? And then you just have to make the best decision for yourself.
So there's the whole thing about, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Sure.
So now you have a certain condition and you talk to a surgeon. Wouldn't the surgeon be biased? Not even from a malicious or profit. Hey, I can cut it out. I can take it out.
Certainly. So for instance, every patient a cardiologist sees has heart disease. So in their mind, everybody has heart disease. And all their patients they have that die of heart disease. So it's how you see a problem depends on where you stand and where in the medical process you're seeing the problem. So we're all looking at it from a very limited prism.
Except when you talk about being a hammer and looking at everything as a nail, and if you are a surgeon, you are bound to think surgery. Surgery is also a moneymaker, isn't it?
Well, it sure is. Yeah, it benefits the surgeon, benefits the hospital, the anesthesiologist, the pathologist who has to look at the tissue, and so on. So there's certainly an incentive to. So let me backtrack. So if you have two interventions that are both safe and effective, there's a tendency to prescribe or lean towards a more expensive one.
Now, I want to get your opinion on this, and I don't remember which drug it was for. Maybe it was for a vaccine even. I don't recall. But I don't come from medical science. I come from, engineering. And so I studied a lot of physics, so science from that end. And I'm used to when you have an experiment and you do it, especially when it's in medicine, you do it double blind. Double blind, that's the gold standard, right? Double blind. Double blind, the placebo group, the group that gets the actual drug, and even the doctors don't know. Double blind. That is a great. I was aware, I became aware through the media. A few years ago, there was a development of either a drug or a vaccine where something caught my eye that was very strange to me. They started the experiment, and then very shortly after, they decided to unravel, undo, and stop the double-blind factor. But the reason that was given to me was mind-blowing. The reason that was given is they said, this seemed to be so effective and so good, we don't want to deprive the placebo people of this gem. And to me, that just read really, really wrong. What do you think of that?
Well, it may have been the COVID vaccines, because that was supposed to be a 3-year study. And after about 2 months into it, they allowed the placebo group or the control group, they allowed them to cross over and receive the vaccine. So it just muddied the waters. So it may have been.
And why would they do that?
Well, they'll do it for a couple reasons. One, let's say it's a 6-month study, and let's say they have positive results, but the results are going down from the 3rd month to the 4th month. They may cut it off at 4 months because they know the trend is going to show that maybe it's not as effective. Conversely, if it's a 6-month study and it's showing good numbers, but the numbers aren't where they're supposed to be, they may extend it to 8 months. So they're kind of moving the goalposts when they do that.
But in the childish reasoning that it's so good, you don't want to deprive the placebo people from it, that sounds really on a kindergarten level.
Well, vaccines are a little bit different because you have a group, you're talking about something that some people aren't going to get. It's different than one group having high blood pressure and they're in the control group, and another group having high blood pressure and they're getting the medication. Now, in that group, it's kind of hard to deny this group the medication if this is really showing overwhelmingly positive results. So there can be cases where that could be justified.
I see. So it's not as ridiculous as it seems.
No, in some cases, it would be an appropriate thing to do.
So tell us more about what's in the book.
Well, what's in the book is I make a few points about, and I alluded to it earlier, that patients aren't getting all the information they need. I spent part of the book talking about what I call the half-truth, how it's very pervasive, and some of it we read to discuss with the manipulation of these statistics. I also spent a whole chapter talking about how big pharma funds the medical education, residency programs, academic centers, the journals, physician organizations. So they're spreading their money, far and wide into the medical infrastructure. There's a chapter on the cozy relationship between the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies. Something like 10 out of the last FDA directors have taken, once they leave the FDA, they take pretty cushy jobs with the pharmaceutical industry. I talk about why medicines are made the way they are. They're really designed to get patents. They're not designed necessarily to replicate normal human physiology. If you look at the several classifications of medications we have, they tend to be blockers and inhibitors. They're blocking a biochemical process that you and I were born to have. And that might be safe in the long run, but what's the long-term consequences of that? Now, one exception would be these GLP-1 weight loss drugs. They're agonists. They help magnify or improve function. And that's one of the reasons they're effective. I also talk about, I actually just questioned the overall value of medicine. Does it do really any good? And in the book, I point out that if you took away healthcare, longevity would only change by about 10%. Most of the reason for increased lifespan has to do with things such as water and clean water and sanitation, antibiotics for infectious, and just those types of things. Maybe some benefit from the vaccines, probably not as much as we're led to believe. Very little has to do with any medical advancements, quite honestly. I spent some time talking about the blue zones. People, as you probably know, there are pockets where people live over 100. And what's interesting, these people don't know anything about medical science. And they're living to be 100, just living life. which we sometimes forget to do.
By the way, a little comment about the blue zones. The blue zone discussion tries to figure out mostly stuff around food. Food is the number one thing. What are they eating? Let's see what they eat. Let's follow their food pattern. And then movement. Oh, they're active. They're in the field. They're working. But remember what we talked about before about being in the natural light? Well, in the blue zones, that seems to be, they live like we used to live 200 and 300 years ago. They're outdoors a lot. And then when they go indoors, usually they don't go on Facebook for hours and Instagram and TikTok.
Right.
That alone is not even mentioned.
They have real social connections.
That too. Absolutely.
Person. Right.
Yeah.
Going back to the sunlight, during the Spanish flu in 1919, 1920, the patients who fared best were those patients treated outdoors and in the sunlight. And it has to do with vitamin D. Vitamin D may be the most important supplement you could take. It's really a hormone. And most of the patients that had COVID that were hospitalized had vitamin D deficiency.
There used to be, in the beginning of the 20th century, sanatoriums and hospitals that had big porches where they actually let the patients spend time in the sunlight. That's no law. In fact, today, you are put in a room where you can't even open the window a crack because it's dangerous in case you fall through the window or jump.
Yeah, but we did the opposite. We'd lock people up in their homes during the outbreak, and then we still had half the population working, so I wasn't sure how that was going to stop the virus. We're still spreading it, even with half the population working.
That thing about locking us indoors rather than, well, there also was a bit of a mismatch between people who lived in single-family homes. So they had a yard. They could be out in the yard. They could walk in the yard. And people who lived in the city in an apartment, in a high-rise, and they didn't.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about those types of differences between those who were able to go outside. Most are more or less cooped up in an apartment building. Did they find any difference in terms of outcomes with COVID or incidents?
I don't think anybody measured.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody. I think it was a directive was to lock inside, and nobody wanted to challenge it. I don't believe. Again, I'm not an expert.
What I appreciate about people like you, I think it's real helpful when outsiders come in and look at a problem, because you tend to come in with fresh eyes. You don't have blinders on, and you haven't been indoctrinated or taught a certain thing. You just ask common sense questions. And that's frequently missing today. Yeah, I like outsiders coming in and shedding some light on things.
To me, if there is a big flu going around or something, and I have access to a beach, to me, just intuitively, that's nothing scientific here. Walking on the beach in the daylight, and seems like that would be a very good thing to do somehow.
It's healthy. You're outdoors. It's relaxing. You could get to clear your mind and think about things too.
Plus all the benefits of the general frequencies of the spectrum of the light and how it affects your mitochondria, and you can go deep into that. By the way, how does it reconcile that medical opinions are shifting? So I think for the last 50 years almost, there was this thing about high cholesterol being a very bad thing, and a giant industry was built around it, which makes a lot of money. But in the last decade or two, many people are starting to say, well, the brain is made mostly of cholesterol. We need cholesterol for our hormones. It's starting to change the narrative. But doctors who went to school in the 1980s, such as yourself, were taught they know cholesterol. So how does it jive with the new knowledge?
Well, patients seem to be more aware of what you just said. The doctors are still trained that everybody needs, if you have high cholesterol, you need to be on a statin drug. Now, there are incentives in place to make that happen. And if you're an employed physician, they control you a little bit. And if you're not meeting this the guidelines, clinical practice guidelines, you get punished for doing that. But the patient awareness is much better than what it was. That all started in 1987. I was an intern. The National Cholesterol Education Program came out. And where I trained, we had a big hospital, meeting. All the physicians had to attend. And the message was, we're going to stamp out heart disease once and for all with statins, because the first statin had just been released, I think in November, December of 86, Mevacor. And I remember leaving the room with two older physicians talking. And one said, this is BS. He goes, I have patients with cholesterol 300. They do fine. I have patients with 150. They have heart attacks. And the other physician said, yeah, this sounds like a pharmaceutical-driven diagnosis.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that generation didn't buy into it. My generation was probably 50-50, but each subsequent generation, it becomes more and more part of just what you do. That's what you do. That's what you're trained to do. You're trained in this box, and you must stay in the box.
Well, there was a thing that happened in the state of California, I believe 2 years ago, maybe 3, where the governor signed a bill that if a medical professional gave advice to a patient that did not line up with the public health recommendation, they could lose their license. Now, it was quietly retracted and canceled. But I mean, why would something that's really scared people when a doctor can't even talk? I think that included things like, you should take more vitamin C, maybe vitamin D. No, losing your license here. That was scary stuff. Why would they do something like that?
My answer would be that the profession's been hijacked by the corporate entities, and they can, I assume they probably have some control over the physician leadership, whether it be the state medical boards, board of directors of the medical subspecialties and physicians organizations. There's a lot of pressure out there, and I don't like getting old, but I'm glad I'm where I am in my career. I just think the profession's going down in a bad direction, and a downward spiral. And physicians are no longer able to do what they think is best in the patient's interest. And it's really a partnership. We've got away from this partnership. I like to find out what do you want as a patient, and how can I help you get there? That's the way it was when I first came out, but it's not that way anymore. It's very much, I'm the physician. You're going to do what I tell you, and I'm going to do what they're telling me, my hospital, and what my boards are telling me to do.
Which you are not supposed to know, the patient. You're not supposed to know.
Correct.
But, to come at it from the other side, I'll be a devil's advocate.
Mm-hmm.
People need security. People want to have a figure of authority.
Right.
A doctor like you went to medical school for many years, did a residency, has a lot of training, signed a pledge to not do any harm and stuff like this. So it's a trusted figure. It's a knowledgeable figure, a leader. And I want to feel like I have a leader. I have a general, a GP who I can trust, who I can share with. I think it's a universal desire to have somebody to speak. You don't have time. You're busy with your job. You can be an expert on the body. So it's easy to say, okay, my doctor. So you give the doctor a lot of power, but you also would hope that the doctor will be there for you. Now, one of the things also that I notice is doctors don't have a lot of time to spend with you anymore.
Correct. So you mentioned the word trust, and I dive into that in one chapter, that you're not going to listen to someone you don't trust. You're going to listen to someone you trust. Therefore, the best half-truths or misinformation will come from people you do trust, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And now physicians are well-intended, but if they're taught a certain way, they're going to tell that to you, and you may benefit from it, but you may not be benefiting as much as you should. And if physicians are trained, you have the best education, just stay in a box. This is all you need to know. All the stuff out here is not relevant to your time. It's not worth your time. don't pursue it. But patients are becoming a little wiser to that. We have other professionals out there, chiropractors, naturopaths, and with the internet, more and more of this stuff's now available for patients. And so patients are becoming better educated. But there's a lot of pressure when physicians are employed, they're controlled, basically.
Well, it's interesting that you said that if there was no medicine at all, then the mortality, you think, would only be maybe 10% higher. Of course, we do need doctors, physicians, surgeons for acute problems. Things happen all the time.
For sure. You make a good point. That 10% doesn't really address the quality of care issue. That's just dealing with the lifespan. There's no doubt that what we do enhances quality of care. I've heard Robert F. Kennedy talk about when his uncle JFK was president, maybe 10% of people had a chronic disease. Now it's like 70%. Well, people would die from their heart attack back in 1960. Those people are living longer and they're able to maintain a certain quality of life. So we do acute care extremely well in this country. It's the chronic care, and it's the chronic care that is lifestyle driven that we really get poor results.
But to be
it's
fair,
because it's lifestyle related, and we don't address it.
To be fair and to defend those poor physicians, including you, I would say the way the agricultural system has been working in this country is not really kind to the nutrient content of the field, of the land. So the produce that we grow, the fruit, even the animals who eat it, are not as rich potentially in nutrients as they were 100 years ago.
Correct.
Or 200 years ago. So now you could say, well, you can supplement. But 200 years ago, we didn't need to supplement. We got everything from the food. So it's people are kind of running on a treadmill that's going up and they're falling back, because even if we try to eat organic and good and clean, the nutrient content may not be what it really should be, what we really need. So then we get maybe sicker. So then it all dovetails into each other.
Correct. You make a good point. To eat healthy these days, it's very expensive. And also this 24/7 access to food is not healthy. Our ancestors didn't have that, back in the caveman days. So yeah, there's a lot of factors that certainly go into it. But eating's probably the most important thing you can do. Exercise is extremely important. Sleeping is very important as well. But a lot of our food is doctored up, for sure.
It occurs to me also, the word local is starting to be used more and more. And I think that's very true. Having talked to people who talked about our type of mitochondria and where we live geographically and the color of our skin adapting to that, and the type of mitochondrial function we have adapting to where we are, everybody seems to say, if you eat your local food at the time it grows, you're likely to do well. Now, the problem is, if it's the middle of the winter, in Minnesota, and you're eating a pineapple that was flown in from Hawaii, apparently not so great.
Correct. And that's probably where some supplementation would be beneficial, and maybe getting food from other countries that maybe mimic, because their season is different than your growing season. That may be a good alternative. But they always say, like, if you're going to get honey, get it from your local bees, because that's going to protect against it. Your immune system is going to respond to that better than if you got it from another state. Now, in the book, I do talk about the Amish population, because where I live, we're pretty close to that. So in 1900, when the lifespan was 47, it was like 70 for the Amish back then. And because they're eating food naturally, they're not living in crowded city conditions like New York or Chicago. They're not dealing with wasteful, bad waste and tainted water. And so their lifestyle hasn't changed, and their lifespan has still stayed consistent. And, they grow their own food too.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that the local issue could be at least partially solved by going to what they call farmers market.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting what you said about the honey too, because there has been a big wave here of buying Manuka honey from, New Zealand and they rank it based on potency. And the high potency ones can cost hundreds of dollars for a little jar. But then it comes from halfway across the world.
Well, I think there's problems with medicine, but at the same time, people with supplements, they're trying to make money too. So everybody's got a profit motive behind it. So you have to be a little bit careful on what you put in your body, regardless if it's natural or a drug.
So Joe, tell us the full name of your book.
The full name is Bamboozled, Duped, and Hoodwinked: Keys to Escaping the Tricks, Deceptions, and the Half-Truths of the Medical Industry. And you can get it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So I don't know if this is going to come out backwards, but
no,
it looks like.
We can see. So that's a title that doesn't pull any punches.
No, I can't. The original title was going to be 90% of medicine's half BS. But I knew that wasn't going to fly. And somewhere on social media, I saw the word bamboozle. I go, I like that. Then I just tried to find two other words that were similar. I thought the duped and hoodwinked, I think it flowed pretty well together.
So, and people can find your book with your name, Dr. Joe Jacko, Jacko.
Jacko. I go by Joe, but for the book, I went by Joseph. So they probably would have to put Joseph in the search engine or the search to find it. It's it's a long book. It's 500 pages, but it has about 380 some references in it.
There's a lot of bamboozlement going on. And it's a long book. So, I mean, if you had to give our viewers, listeners, a couple of tips, what would they be?
I would say do your own research, regardless of what your doctor tells you. I don't mind when patients go to Google because it gives me an idea of what they're concerned about and what they're thinking. And when I know that, I know how I can best approach them. I would also, particularly if you're going to have surgery, I would look for a second opinion. You have to go outside the medical system that gave you the first one, though, to get a true second opinion. You can get anything you want in medicine if you're willing to pay for it out of pocket. So you might have to go outside the insurance model for certain things and be willing to pay out of pocket particularly with hormone replacement or things like peptides or just getting certain diagnostic tests. Many patients don't realize that they can order their own lab work. They can order their own MRI scans. There's places that can do that. And so they're not really dependent on the doctor necessarily, but they may have to go to a doctor to try to figure out what it means. What else can I say? I would look for doctors that have, most doctors have stayed in that traditional mode. There's probably 2 to 5% that have gone beyond that. And I would look for a physician that has gone beyond that because they have all the traditional things, but they have additional things, whether it be acupuncture, remedies, regenerative medicine, peptides, hormones. They have more tools. Because the average primary care doctor just has a prescription pad.
Maybe you can say a couple of words about peptides.
Well, peptides you can think of them as small proteins. They're amino acids up to about 50. They're signaling molecules that kind of tell the cell that you need to do something, you need to produce whatever it is that cell does. There are peptides for virtually everything. There are peptides for your brain. There's peptides for your gut health. There are peptides for immune function. There's peptides for growth and development and tissue repair. Problem is, it was kind of a wild, wild west there for a while, and you can get them pretty easily, but it's becoming more challenging. The FDA has kind of cracked down on what they will allow us to prescribe as physicians. But interesting enough, if you search hard enough, you can get them on your own.
Very interesting. So there are many of them, and you kind of need to have somebody maybe guide you through the forest of choices.
Correct. So the GLP-1s, the weight loss drugs, those are peptides. Insulin was probably the first peptide developed. So peptides are different than medications in the sense that many of the medications that I mentioned earlier, they block something. Peptides don't do that. Peptides enhance or magnify or facilitate normal function.
Very fascinating.
And that's a fascinating area. Yeah.
How can we find out more about? I know this is not the first time we all hear it, of course. We need to bring somebody who specializes in this on the show. But what can we do to get some more besides just doing, a Google search or a chat GPT?
Peptides, there's a few. There's a place called the Seed Scientific and Research Institute, SSRI, or Seed, something like that. I go to their meetings. They have a lot of information out there. a lot of their meetings are attended by non-physicians.
What's the first word?
The Seeds Scientific and Research. Gosh, I forgot.
How do you spell it?
SEEGES.
Okay.
And if you give me a second, I can probably find it because I do mention them in the book somewhere. There's a gentleman named Jay Campbell, who's a personal trainer. He has several books out there. He has a very nice website that you just put in whatever peptide you're interested in, and you may see 4 or 5 articles on it. He even goes through the dosing. Some of these are cycled on and off. He goes through the various protocols, contraindications for that. So there's places like that. It's not well discussed within the traditional medicine model, though, outside the ones you can prescribe, like the weight loss drugs.
Thank you. I would appreciate that. Joe, I want to thank you very much for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. We learned stuff, and we could learn more in your book, and maybe you'll send us the information about the peptides. So sure. I appreciate it all.
Well, thanks, Ideal. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for joining me today. Click the subscribe button for more video. Got a question or comment? I love questions and comments. Leave yours below. And here's another video you've got to see.